Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 60 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Paul Asay, author and film critic for PluggedIn.com. You know, I get the chance to talk movies with Paul almost every preview screening that I go to. He's one of the smartest guys I know and a really shrewd observer of film. I think you're going to really enjoy what he has to say. This week's show is sponsored by Tarantino Shovels. When you just can't stop digging, think Tarantino. Before my chat with Paul, I wanted to talk about Star Wars. Now, I have to say, I grew up with Star Wars action figures. I remember seeing the first film 4 times. I am a Star Wars nerd. I'm a grown man, but I'm a nerd. So there's that. But I can't shake how unhappy I was after walking out of The Last Jedi. And it wasn't just it didn't live up to my expectations. You know, the show will go on. Not every movie can be a great movie. There was something a little bit deeper and darker and sadder, really, about the experience. And it's just kind of the wave of Star Wars news that's kind of coming over us right now. And maybe that's really contributing to what's going on in my Star Wars nerdy brain. We've got a new Star Wars series that has been approved by the Team Disney, and it's going to be spearheaded by Rian Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, but it's not going to be a Skywalker saga. It's going to be an entirely new story set in the Star Wars universe, whatever that means. Of course, that's not the only standalone series. The folks behind Game of Thrones, a fairly popular show you may have heard about, they've got the green light as well to do another series based on Star Wars that, again, doesn't connect to the Skywalker saga. It's going to be a brand new story, brand new set of characters in this particular universe. Meanwhile, the next Star Wars movie, Solo, a Star Wars story, well, we finally got a chance to see the trailer, and they did a really good job of hiding Han Solo. I don't think that's really the mission. Are they trying to create a sense of mystery, or are all the rumors and bad buzz true that the particular actor they've chosen for this particular role, Alden Ehrenreich, is not the right guy to play Han Solo? Well, we're going to find out in May, but so far, got to be a little bit weary about that. So where does that leave the Star Wars franchise, the brand, the name, everything that we care about in the Star Wars universe? Well, I don't really know. It certainly doesn't seem like it's in healthy territory, and it's weird because, you know, when Disney bought Star Wars from George Lucas for $4 billion, they made a lot of the right moves. I thought The Force Awakens, although flawed, really did kind of bridge the gap between the old and new characters, introduce us to Finn and Rey. I thought that was a great transition, a near-perfect baton handoff from one generation to the next. And I thought, you know, old fans are going to hang with this. Maybe you get some new fans as well. The kids will appreciate BB-8 and sort of all the new things that they get to see. But it still felt like a Star Wars story, and I thought that was really critical. But then, of course, The Last Jedi comes around, and I have so many problems with that. Please go to HollywoodandToto.com to read my official review. I can't even get into all the ways that movie disappointed me, but what happens next? What if Solo isn't very good? The Last Jedi's box office, while spectacular, of course, is nowhere near what we saw for The Force Awakens. And I've spoken to a lot of people online and off saying, I don't have enthusiasm for the saga after The Last Jedi. And if you look at the movie and its ending, why would you? What are there, about 3 rebels left fighting for the resistance? I mean, the story doesn't have any sort of natural momentum at this point. So yeah, you know, the Solo movie may surprise us. Maybe the Game of Thrones creators know exactly what to do with this particular universe. You know, hope springs eternal, but as a Star Wars fan, a longtime one, I have to say I've never been more, I guess, frustrated or maybe even disappointed in where the franchise is going next.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. Hey, still ate sandwiches with the crust cut off.
And now here's the celebrity tweet of the week. This week's honor goes to Kumail Nanjiani, the comedian and star of The Big Sick, a very good film that appeared last year and is on Amazon Prime right now, has apparently had enough with Team Trump. So he wrote a very eloquent defense of his principles, the reasoning behind, nah, just kidding. Here we go, and You'll have to forgive my editing. I'm trying to keep this PG-13. F. Trump, F. John Kelly, F. Mike Pence, F. Omarosa, F. Paul Ryan, F. Mitch McConnell, F. Steve Bannon, F. Betsy DeVos, F. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, F. Trey Gowdy, F. Devin Nunes, F. Carter Page, F. Rob Porter, F. Sean Spicer, F. Hope Hicks, and F. Jared. Doesn't he sound nice?
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
My hit tip of the week is 50-50. This 2011 dramedy stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt as a young man who seems like he's heading in the right direction in life, and then he discovers he's got a tumor on his spine. The condition is serious, even life-threatening, and of course, the title comes from the fact that he does a little Google searching and finds out he's got a 50-50 chance of survival. Seth Rogen plays his best chum here, and of course, you know he's really good at that kind of role, but it's some of the darker places the story goes, including using that really terrible diagnosis to pick up chicks. Well, that's not what you expect from a movie like this. I guess you could say it's making lemonade out of lemons, but it's a little bit nasty at the same time. Now, I have to say, I'm really surprised at how well the film balances that darkness and the sweetness and the friendship angle. Lots of different competing emotions here, all put together very effectively. Good performances all around. I just really like this film. I've only seen it once. I'm really eager to see it again, maybe a little bit longer, just so my memory cells die down a bit and it's going to feel newer to me. But if you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. 50-50 is available now on Amazon Prime.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
This is 40 stories of sheer adventure, my friend.
What's your favorite scary movie?
You will believe that a man can fly.
That's right. We're talking about all these terrible franchises and more on The Franchise. Co-hosted by Daniel Ehrenberg and
Henry Papali, folks.
That's right. So check it out. Your boy Christian Toto from the Hollywood in Toto podcast has been on an episode about Yeah, Baby, Yeah.
Yeah.
Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery.
That's right. And if you feel lucky, punks, you should tune into our show, too.
That's right. The Franchise on iTunes.
Now let's get to my chat with Paul Asay. Paul is a film critic for PluggedIn.com. It's a Christian website that offers readers a very detailed view of the latest films. He's going to explain more about that in a minute. He's also the author of God in the Streets of Gotham, a really terrific book about Batman and faith, and Burning Bush 2.0. His Pathos blog is Watching God, Finding Faith with a Box of Popcorn. And he also co-hosts the Pop Culture with Fanboy and Know-It-All podcast. Check that one out, too. I really like hanging out with Paul. He's a good friend. He lives in Colorado along with me. I wish I could hang out with him more, but I got a chance to just talk films with him right now, right here. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Here's my chat with Paul Asay. Well, Paul, you're a film critic for a website that helps fellow Christians choose the best movies to watch. And I was kind of curious, I've seen you in action in the theater, but take readers into your mindset and how your reviews are different than a traditional review. I mean, it's certainly for a specific audience, but I think your method's a little bit different. You have a different approach.
Well, it is a little bit different, and you're right. I think that when you're a secular movie critic who's writing for just folks who want to know whether the movie's any good or not, you are able to sort of sit down and watch the movie and maybe take a few notes. But for the most part, you're able to really let yourself sink into the story. My work for Plugged In is much different in that we're writing primarily for families. Our audiences our audience is primarily parents with kids in the house, teens in the house. They're looking to see what they might be able to take their sons and daughters to. And a lot of people do come from themselves as well, but they have a very, very high level of interest in the content that they might see. And by that, I mean the problematic content. Is it going to be too violent? Is there going to be a lot of sex? Is there a lot of cursing? All that kind of stuff, which means that when I sit down and when my colleagues sit down, we have to take really detailed notes. And I know we probably annoy the people sitting next to us, because we have these, we're always taking these notes, and we're literally counting swear words, which is, it's a very interesting way to watch a movie. And I think that, and while we provide a service, it's definitely a little bit different than most movie reviewers.
Well, it begs two questions. One is, when you watch a film and you really enjoy it, you're at work watching the film, you have to take all those notes. Do you say, I just can't wait to watch this movie again as a sort of a person in the audience?
Yeah. Well, there are times when it's like that. I think that we sit down and we take these notes, and we can still, the story, obviously movies are, you and I are both movie lovers. And so the stories can be very powerful regardless of content. And so we watch these things, and we absorb the stories, and I do find myself thinking, I cannot wait to take my wife to this, or I can't wait to take my kids to this. Or I can't wait to see it again. I think that there are certain stories that really move us as people that we want to see again, and to see the things that we missed. We just love to dive into those stories repeatedly. It is sort of interesting when I watch a movie that I really like, but that may have a lot of content. I find myself, I'm marking everything down. I'm writing everything that I need to write down. And I find myself, tears maybe streaming down my face, and I'm trying to write while doing all this sort of stuff. And it's a very strange thing. It really is.
You have kind of a unique angle on sex and violence in the movies, because I feel like as a moviegoer, I'm getting desensitized to it. I mean, I watched the last John Wick film and I go, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how violent that was. But then I was okay with it, just because I was kind of numbed into whatever John Wick was able to do to me. From your perspective, do you find that films in general are getting more sex and violence is playing a part? It's happening less? I mean, as a critic who's done this for a while now, do you see any trends, or is it always case by case?
It's a really good question. And I think that probably a lot of people in our audience would say that movies are just getting worse and worse, and television is just getting worse and worse from that perspective. I don't know if I completely agree with that. I think that in some ways, obviously you have the 50 Shades of Grays of the world that really ramp up the sexual content. But from what I recall, we're both sort of children of the 80s. And I think that when you sit in and you watch a general PG-13 movie, you don't find nearly as much gratuitous sex as you might have back in the day when we were watching Top Gun and those types of things. I think that in some ways those sort of elongated sexual scenes has been sort of throttled back. I do think that violence is getting more pervasive, and I think that as a culture we tend to accept violence a lot more. Even my subset of evangelical Christians who I primarily write to, I think that they're far more accepting of violence than they are of sexual content in movies, and I find that to be a pretty interesting dynamic. And I also think that language has gotten quite a bit worse as time has gone on, and for me, that's one of the most puzzling things, because I find that while you can make a very strong argument why some movies need to show you the violence, the Saving Private Ryans of the world, you can even make an argument in some cases where sexual content is required for the story or augments the story. Very rarely do I think that that's the case with language, and I think that maybe you and I could have a conversation about the gritty realism of some of these crime movies or something like that, where the language obviously adds to the color and flavor of a certain locale or whatnot. But as an old movie fan, I grew up in some ways on black and white movies, and my mom would take us to this old movie theater where we'd see these old classic Cary Grant, Humphrey Bogart movies. And to me, of course, those never had any language at all. And for me, I think that you have that sense of storytelling that just doesn't require it. And I've yet to actually walk out of a theater and think to myself, you know what that movie really needed? It needed a few more F words. I just don't think I've never really felt that way.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think when I watch a movie now, if those words pop on the screen, especially like in a comedy like Baywatch, I don't know why this one really stuck in my craw. My immediate thought is lazy, lazy, lazy. They're trying to kind of push our buttons in a way. And you know what? in our daily interactions, people really don't speak like that. If I'm in college and my buddies we're all drinking and having fun and kind of letting loose, yeah, it's going to sound like that. But in sort of day-to-day interactions, it doesn't. So when you see that, I think it was maybe, a movie I hated last year called, the Fist Fight with Charlie Day. I'm thinking the language was just so over the top and so R-rated. I thought, no, I don't think anyone talks like this. I don't think we're there yet. So I agree. As a film critic, you don't need special training, and I'm very grateful for that. Right? But I'm kind of curious. Everyone has different backgrounds. They bring, scholastically, maybe your personal background. What do you think it is in your background that really either helped define you as a critic, shape you as a critic, or just kind of something you feed off of as a critic?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think that one of the things that I bring to the table is just number one, a love of movies and more broadly, a love of stories. I'm an English major. I'm a lit major. In college, that type of thing. I watched movies all growing up. I've always loved them. And I'm sure that everybody who gets into the field we do is probably pretty much the same way, right? I mean, you don't become a movie critic when you think that movies are just sort of so-so.
Well, it's for fame and glory, too. I mean, let's not discount that.
You can't forget the money.
Oodles of money.
But so I really bring, I think, an appreciation of great storytelling. And so I really enjoy seeing that on screen. I think in my unusual line of work, I also grew up in an evangelical family that really took what we call movie discernment pretty seriously. There were definitely things that I couldn't watch. There were definitely things that I couldn't listen to growing up. And I think that has carried over with me to a certain extent. I think that as parents, we need to be fairly cautious about the sort of entertainment that we let our kids watch and absorb and that type of thing. And I think that every family sort of draws a different line for that. So I think that in some ways, in my very unusual niche, in this very niche field that we're both in, I think that both of those prongs have really helped me going forward. I think that I really have a strong appreciation of a story well told, but I also really value a story told in an age-appropriate manner, and I have a really strong appreciation for great stories told that really the whole family can sit and watch together. I have such an appreciation for what Pixar has done over the years, where they have the insides, outs, and the ups of the world, where they are among, I think, the very, very best stories told within the culture.
That's a good point.
They're so delightful to watch. They're so powerful, and I think in some ways they're made for adults even more than kids. But kids can sit down and watch them and enjoy them and laugh at the lines and all that kind of stuff. Even as parents gravitate toward the poignancy of some of these stories, the idea of how painful it can be to let go or grow up or whatnot. And I think that Pixar what they are doing in Pixar is just brilliant.
I agree. I've spoken to a lot of different Pixar animators over the last 10 years or so, and all they talk about is story, and how they will shut things down if the story is not evolving or flowing or going in the direction that they hope it would. So interesting. I just have a quick aside. My sons are 9 and 6, and it is a constant struggle for me when it comes to what they watch, because I am absolutely dying for them to see Alien, and I'm dying for them to see all these movies that I love and grew up with and blah, blah, blah. But they're R-rated, and they're not ready for that yet. And I've kind of at times dipped toes into that water. There was a PG-13 horror movie that my son wanted to watch. I think it might have been Insidious. And he was scared by the, when you put the DVD in the, sort of the title frame, sort of that image. He's like, he was out. I'm like, all right, we're done.
I'm done.
And I'm like, Eli, please get to be 14, 15, 16. I want to.
I know, because you want to share these things. I totally get it.
So.
Yeah, and I tell you what, my kids are grown. My kids are 24 and 27, so they're lost causes by now. But when you look at parenthood today, it is so difficult to be a parent. I mean, you have our culture is just saturated with entertainment, and there are some super powerful, super great stories that you do want to share with your kids, and yet you have these elements within them, and sometimes I think that it's so hard to figure out where the line is.
Yeah, there is no line. It's your line. And then
that's exactly right.
Line. And never the twain shall meet. So
no, and it's one of those things where I think that I am very appreciative of the fact that every single kid is different, and every single parent will draw a line at a different place. And I think that's one of the things that we try to do, and that I try to do, is just give parents the information that they want and they need to make their own decision. Because if you try to actually say, oh, well, this is good for kids 8 and up, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're talking with film critic and author Paul Asay, senior associate editor with PluggedIn.com. You can follow him on Twitter at AsayPaul. That's ASAYPAUL. Check it out. Now, I want to talk briefly about being a film critic and getting jaded. Years ago I worked at a newspaper, and the main critic, and I won't say who he was a very smart, talented, nice fellow, but he would just fire off these 1.5-star reviews of movies that were Oscar nominees. I mean, I feel like he was the hardest critic I've ever known as far as how discerning he was. But I also suspected that maybe he's been doing it so long he's a little bit burned out. Do you ever get to that point or flirt with it? And what do you do? I mean, is it sort of you have to kind of do like an Etch-a-Sketch and shake your mental synapses, or what? How do you kind of avoid getting into that place?
Well, it's sort of interesting, again, because I work in such a different world in some ways. I think that lots of our readers would really appreciate the more cynicism, the better. We tend to be in kind of the Christian world that I walk. We tend to be very suspicious of entertainment. And so it's not as much of an issue. In some ways, sometimes I think that I could stand to be more cynical. but at the same time, you're right. I think that sometimes you and I remember this actually reading reviews. I used to read movie reviews religiously, so to speak, when I was a teen, and I would always be appalled that some of these reviewers would rate some of my very favorite movies and give them just like 2 stars, 2.5 stars, and I thought, what are these people thinking? They're just so jaded. And I do think that since I've been in this business for, I guess, going on 10 years now, I can see how that happens. I think because we see so many movies. I don't know how many movies you saw last year, Christian, but I think I saw close to 100. Mm-hmm. And so when you see so many movies, you see some of the same stories over and over again. And so you see some of the same themes. And because of that, I think that as movie reviewers, we tend to gravitate toward not only resonant stories, but resonant stories told in a very different way that we can appreciate because it's a story that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I think The Shape of Water is doing so well, because I know it's a Beauty and the Beast-esque story, but it feels very original. Mm-hmm, and I think that I think particularly critics I think it's a little overrated. I think critics are responding to that, and it's only natural. And I agree. Formulaic wise, I'm a little bit. I get filled up, and I almost have to kind of mentally reboot sometimes to say, "Hey, I'm getting fresh," and I am the audience surrogate, as are you, and maybe in different ways, but that is our job.
Yeah. But it is sort of interesting because I think that one of the things that may inoculate us more than some, and I may be pressing the point a little bit, I may be jumping to conclusions, but I think that both of us, we have a certain love for populist movies. I mean, we both have a side geeky center of our soul in some ways, and I think that actually helps keep us young and fresh, because it's sometimes when we go into these movies, at least I find myself wanting to be a kid again. I want to feel like I'm 8 years old again, seeing this movie for the very first time. That's one of the things that I really loved about the new Star Wars movie, actually, and I know you didn't like it nearly as much as I did. but for me, there were moments where I felt like I was 7 or 8 years old watching the first Star Wars movie again, and I love that.
I think I had that more with The Force Awakens, but that's a podcast chat for a different day, and and a duel for a different day. I want to talk a little bit about the Christian faith-based film movie genre. Faith-friendly films. You can whatever label you want to smack on it. I was kind of curious about two things. One, I find it to be maturing. I think it's growing. I think it's kind of getting more sophisticated, and the stories are getting more varied. I want to get if you agree or disagree. And I also want to say, is sort of slapping that label on, it's a faith-based movie, is that doing a disservice? Because most people are people of faith, and why can't their stories be told?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting question. Both of those are really interesting questions. And I think that the first one, I would agree with you. I think that the faith-based movie industry is getting stronger, and I think it's getting better. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have a ways to go. I don't think that most of us would look at most explicitly Christian movies and say, this should be nominated for an Oscar. They have some storytelling weaknesses. It's a work in progress. It really is. The whole industry is a work in progress, and I think it will be a while before we get to the point where there's going to be this beautiful resonant story that I think in some ways does justice to the faith that I hold so dear. But I also think that when you're talking the question of whether the label helps or hurts is a fascinating one. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I've completely made up my mind on this point. I do know that for some of the very, very explicitly Christian movies, the God's Not Dead of the world, which frankly I did not appreciate very much, but I know a lot of people really did, and I think that people some people go to the God's Not Deads of the world because they are so explicitly faith-based, and it scratches sort of this theological, philosophical, even sometimes political itch that they have. And I think that in some ways, Hollywood has not done a very good job of highlighting, the faith of some of their characters. I think that most of the time, and this goes back way into the 1930s and 40s, I think that faith, because it's such a volatile topic and can be so polarizing, I think that Hollywood has just generally stayed away from stories that even deal very lightly with faith. But I think that does a disservice to the stories themselves, because faith is a huge motivating factor in so many people's lives. I mean, I know people who have upturned their families, their worlds, because they wanted to follow God's call, what they feel is God's call. And I think that because faith and God is so important to us inherently, that makes for interesting stories. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, I think that when you ignore faith as an element of a story, you're weakening the story. Because it's a fascinating thing no matter where you come from it. And I think that if Hollywood did a better job of incorporating faith-oriented storylines or even subplots or even just gave us some resonant Christian characters that we felt like we could embrace and see ourselves in, as opposed to sometimes these caricatures that we're given, I think that there wouldn't be such a hunger for those explicit faith-based films. I think that we would be able to see ourselves in kind of that Hollywood environment, and those movies would resonate with us so much more.
That's an amazing point. I want to do two quick examples. One was Alien Covenant, and the other one was the more recent Cloverfield Paradox. Both those films had characters where they describe their faith or have a faith moment, and then they're done. It was like, okay, we did that, we checked that box, and we're not going to carry that through in any significant way. We have no time, no patience, no interest in, sort of using it as a theme or a thread. And it just kind of struck me, because it struck me when it happened, and then I thought back, well, wait a minute, why would they even introduce that if they're not going to even do anything with it? But that's just the way it happens. And real quickly, do you think that have you seen Lady Bird?
I have seen Lady Bird.
I thought that had a very interesting take on faith, where it wasn't a one and done. It had that sort of a teen trying to shake it, and then at the end, it kind of circled back in a way which I thought was both real and not offensive at all. What's your take on it?
No, I totally agree. And that was, as a matter of fact, when you started talking about Alien Covenant, that was sort of like the antidote that jumped into my mind with Lady Bird, and you have what you say about Alien Covenant was absolutely right. You have this character who expresses these thoughts about faith. He feels like, and because of that, he feels like he could be one of the most compelling characters of the whole movie. I mean, you see this struggle within him trying to figure out how to manifest his faith, how that means, what that means to his leadership, and then they kill him off. And you never really get a sense of the character.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Lady Bird is almost the exception to everything that I've been talking about. And for me, it gives me hope of what Hollywood can do. Lady Bird, you're absolutely right. The character is a girl who goes to this Catholic Christian school. She doesn't like it very much. She is sort of at that point in her life where she looks around her world and she doesn't like anything she sees. She's sick of her family. She doesn't like her hometown. She despises her Catholic school. She has no place for faith in her life. And as I go through kind of what I'm talking about, just a little caveat. I mean, this is an R-rated movie, so there's some difficult parts to it. But as the story goes through and you follow this really winsome, really funny girl as she goes through her senior year of high school, she finds her way back, oddly enough, to all those things that she felt like she needed to reject. She grows to have a new appreciation for her mom. And one of the most poignant moments, I don't think this is really spoiling anything because it's not really a spoilery type of movie, but at the end, one of the things that almost brought me to tears was she hears, she's in college now, she's away from everything that's familiar to her, she hears the sound of church bells and she goes into the church and you can feel that she feels at home. And for me, that was just beautiful. I had a chance to talk with Greta Gerwig about the movie, and she really wanted to express kind of what she had gone to a Catholic school herself, and she really wanted to express how that church changed her, or how that school changed her, and the beautiful people that she met there. She wanted to get away from sort of that Hollywood stereotype that you see so much, and be more representative of the experience that she had. And I think it was beautiful and poignant and deeply impactful for people of faith like I am, while not being, I don't think, off-putting to people who don't necessarily share that faith. They see that as part of her story, and so they're able to embrace it.
I think when it's done as eloquently and as beautifully and as real as that was all transpired, I think that's where you get, no, it's not offensive. No, it's not someone that would drive away an atheist. I think they kind of would get into the story. One last question for you, Paul, before I let you go, and I feel like I can't leave you without asking about this topic. It is such a hot button now, and I think it's going to be for a while. The Me Too movement and sort of the sexual allegations in Hollywood. As an outsider, as someone who kind of looks at the system in a way that I think is more intense than most people, what are you most impressed about when you see the progress, and what kind of leaves you the most skeptical about what we're seeing within the Hollywood movement?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I think that what I'm seeing, and this is something that may be a little bit controversial to some, but in some ways, I feel like we're sort of in a period of time where morality really matters. It's not the sort of Christian morality that I think most of us sort of jump to when we think about our own childhoods, or we think back to the 1950s, or even the moral majority or whatnot. We are living in a time where people really understand that actions and deeds really mean something. We don't live in a world where anything really should go. There are limits to what we can do, and there are things that we should hold ourselves to higher standards than sometimes we have in the past. And I think from that perspective, what I see from the Me Too movement is this desire to hold people accountable for what they've done, to encourage people as they go forward to really consider how they treat others. And I think that that's really valuable and long overdue. You do worry, as with any period of grand morality, that there's going to be sort of this overstep. And I don't know if I'm really equipped to speak to whether we've hit that point where people are being unfairly accused or unfairly maligned. I think that there's always a danger of rushing to judgment, because when you accuse somebody of something that they didn't do, those accusations will stick with you for the rest of your life. And so you always have to be very, very worried about rushing to judgment. And I do think that sometimes there's always sort of this overreach that we can reach. So I think that would be one of the concerns that I would have going forward, because I think that's just sort of human nature. I think that we see these injustices, we find them horrible, and so we push against them so hard that sometimes we end up hurting people who really shouldn't be hurt. Yeah. And whether we've reached that point or not, I just don't feel like I have enough knowledge to know whether we have. I think that overall, I think the Me Too movement has been a good thing, and I'm really gratified that people are really standing up and hopefully getting to the point where this sort of stuff that was apparently so pervasive in Hollywood is just not tolerated anymore.
Yeah, if the next Harvey Weinstein has a second thought about doing what he wants to do, then that's immediately a good first step. So
exactly.
Right. Well, thanks again, Paul, for joining the HiTcast. You can find Paul's film reviews at pluggedin.com, and please check out his excellent Bat book, God on the Streets of Gotham. I love that one. And also another book he's got out, Burning Bush 2.0, How Pop Culture Replaced the Prophet. And you can find links to both on the show notes page at hollywoodintoto.com. Paul, really appreciate your time, and maybe we can revisit this conversation with or without the Last Jedi.
Love to do it. Love to do it anytime.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out hollywoodintoto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at hollywoodintoto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.